On today's episode of Still Processing, a 76ers podcast, the Still Processing group discusses the idea of Joel Embiid ducking the Denver Nuggets, the game in Denver itself, which was the secondary storyline of the night, a certain Sixer possibly being on the trade block, and could a Philadelphia area native be returning to the city of brotherly love? All that and more on the latest episode of Still Processing, a 76ers podcast. Hello, welcome back to another episode of Still Processing, a 76ers podcast. I'm your host, Zach Ciavolella, here with, of course, one of my stunning co-hosts, Sam DiGiovanni, and our producer joining us for today's show, Mr. Uriah Young. So, starting, Sam, first of all, how you doing today?
I'm doing all right. Happy to be back. My second episode co-hosting the pod. I don't know if you guys noticed. I have a friend behind me, my little kitty Frankie. If you ever see me at any point, if you're watching and you see me look around, or if you hear maybe a little squeak or a scratch or something, that's probably Frankie getting up to his shenanigans. So we'll try to manage that sound as best as I can. But he's doing good, and so am I.
Good. Well, this is a Frankie-friendly pod. Frankie, unofficial mascot of the Still Processing podcast. So any Frankie sound bites are always welcome. Uriah, how you been, man? It's been a while since we've had you on.
Hey, it's great to be here. And Sam has Frankie. I have Benny, my dog, but he's not behind me. He's actually under my feet right now. So yeah, it's great to be back. I'm looking forward to talking Sixers. There is a lot to talk about.
Yeah, definitely a lot to talk about. We're inching obviously closer to the trade deadline, to the All-Star break. But the story surrounding the Sixers is not just about who they might acquire this time of year. It's not just about Joel Embiid making his 7th straight All-Star game appearance. It's about Embiid and the Denver Nuggets. And before we delve too deep into the true story of the night, let's focus on what actually mattered that night, and that was the game the Sixers played against the Denver Nuggets. Without Tyrese Maxey, without Joel Embiid, without Tobias Harris, without DeAnthony Melton, Robert Covington, Mo Bamba, this list goes on and on and on. The Sixers took the stage at what is the Ball Arena, the Ball Arena. That's such a downgrade from the Pepsi Center, if I'm being flat honest. But so they made the hike up the mountain to Denver to play in Colorado at that atmosphere that everyone knows is not fun for visiting teams. And with their extremely short-handed squad, they almost succeeded and overtook the Denver Nuggets, the defending champs, mind you. So I guess, Sam, first thing I want to ask, what really stood out, or who really stood out from that game to you?
I think the man of the hour has to be Paul Reed. Led the entire game in scoring, and this was obviously someone had to take the shots with the Sixers' top 3 options and another one of their starters sidelined. And he was the leading scorer in a game that also featured Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray, which is just fantastic. And Paul did it with jumpers, which was super surprising. Obviously, his jumper, he's shown a little more confidence with it this year, but it hasn't always looked great. But that was a game where, and we'll get into who helped him achieve this career high in a moment. He just took what the defense gave him. The Nuggets were playing drop. Obviously, you're not going to, try to chase a guy like that off of his spot in the mid-range or whatever. But Paul just took the shots, and his jumper looks unlike anyone else's, but he made it work. And he was able to get to some open spots. A lot of that was because of Patrick Beverley, who had, off the top of my mind, I believe was 17 points and a season-high 11 assists. He was moving the ball around really well. Nuggets mixed up some coverages here and there, and he, like Paul Reed, took what the defense gave him. I'm still continuing to be pleasantly surprised by how well Pat can attack off the dribble, can get into a shot, can get into, fake in the paint and get a quick, push shot up there. Both of them were really well, played really well. Some efficient scoring from Kelly Oubre and Marcus Morris. But, yeah, obviously they did fall in the end. But that was one of the more entertaining Hospital Sixers games, at least of the Embiid era, if not the last few years. It really was a great effort too from the whole team. Like they played after a very not so fun game in Indiana. They came, they played hard, and they gave Denver quite the scare. Obviously, you ask anyone, any of the coaches, players, they're not going to talk about moral victories, but that that was a game that they should come out feeling good about at least as they continue their road trip.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of reasons to feel good. There are no such things as moral victories, but definitely a game as competitive as that, considering the circumstances, feels a lot better than getting blown out. That's just a simple fact of it. But you're right. Anything else stand out to you? Any other players in particular, or anything about that night that stood out to you?
Yeah, there's a particular number that stood out to me. It wasn't a stat. It was actually that big number in the center of their court, 5280. Help me out, guys. Am I missing something?
Because it's the Mile High. You can't have two numbers on the jersey, though. It's so stupid. It looks terrible.
It is. It really is.
A little distracting. But anyway, so I think, Sam, like you were saying about Paul Reed, I've been waiting for this game all season. I think once he signed that contract, Utah tried to tug him away from the Sixers, and he decided to stay with the team that drafted him. It was really great to see Paul Reed have that game. I think he needed that. But a player that stood out to me, Sam mentioned, was Pat Beverly. He's the player that if he's not on your team, he gets under your skin, he gets on your nerves. But when he's on your team, you love him because he's one of those guys, rare guys that can back it up. But at the same time, is as brash and as outspoken as he is, he's humble enough to know that he's there for a reason. He is a role player when he needs to be. But in the game last night, he clearly was able to demonstrate his veteran experience, demonstrate being cool and calm under the pressure of being in such a hostile arena, 5280. But at the same time, some of the shots that Sam mentioned, the push shot, where he's like a hard drive and then stop, a jump hook. The floater was looking good until the end. I think that one that just went in and out. But I just want to say about Pat Bev, his defensive mindset, his ability to disrupt plays, blocking. I think he blocked Jokic like in the first half, if I'm not mistaken. But in the fourth quarter, I distinctly remember him making play after play on defense. And he's kind of inspiring. I don't know if that's the right word that I'm looking for, but I really love Pat Bev's game overall.
Yeah, and he was coaching throughout the game too. Is the other really impressive thing. The broadcast even took a moment to show him coaching up Paul Reed during the game on how they wanted to work the screen game, and it was, I mean, really just to have a guy like that on the court who is producing, obviously, which it's not normally the task that Pat Bev is produced to do, or is expected to do, produce at a statistical level. But he's providing that impact there. He's providing that impact with his IQ and his tenacious fierceness defensively. And then just as a leader as well, just really from all three of those levels, just providing that much needed level of impact when you are missing guys like Joel Embiid, Tyrese Maxey, Tobias Harris. You can't say enough how big Pat Bev's been. He's a lifelong Sixer who's in his first year, even though he's at the tail end of his career. So it's crazy to see. It's been far too long coming. The team should be, and they are obviously so ecstatic that he's here. And I definitely think that those two players in particular stood out. I think there was one other who stood out to me. I'm going to get to him in a second, but to continue on about Pat Bev just for a second, what was really impressive was the way that he adjusted defending Jamal Murray in the second half. Murray went off for 23 points in that first half. And the first thing that I thought of seeing that stat line at halftime, about the 23 points, was what Pat Bev had said after the game in Philadelphia not that long ago, where he talked about locking up Jamal Murray and how it wasn't the first time, it's what he does, everything like that, and how that clearly did not sit well with Murray, not at all. And I think that kind of fueled that first half performance. But then Pat Bev doesn't let that stop him. He just decides, all right, second half, no, that's it. You're done. Like, you had your time. Now this is over. Murray went scoreless in the entire second half against Philadelphia. And you can say what you want about the Nuggets kind of like playing with their food a little bit. I think there's a little bit of truth to that, more so when it comes to Jokic specifically. I obviously he did not play as well as he could have. I think that there was just a little bit of listlessness, which we've seen from Jokic at times. Like that's it. He's not always fully engaged until he has to be, and that is what it is. I don't think it's as big of an issue as some others may, but I don't think that was the case with Jamal Murray. I really think it was a case of Pat Bev just kind of adjusting to Murray defensively and really providing that kind of lockdown defense that they needed in that second half. So major points to him. And Sam, talking about Paul Reed, you mentioned the jump shooting. I mean, there were times where, I won't say he looked like Joel Embiid because that form looks nothing like Joel Embiid, but he was knocking him down like Joel Embiid. And that's something that I think Sixers fans will take 10 times out of 10. I mean, you're right, as you alluded to, like this is the game that Sixers fans have been waiting for, and really Nick Nurse to a degree as well. You want to see this on a more consistent basis. Over his last 10, for the most part, he has done very well. He's been a lot more consistent as an interior defender. He's been a lot more consistent as a rebounder in particular, which is the other big thing that you need him for. And so games where he's scoring like this are fantastic. But as long as he, at the end of the day, is providing that interior defense and providing that hard effort on the boards on both sides, that's really what you need from Paul Reed at the end of the day. And he provided that and a lot more in Denver Saturday night. So that really was great to see out of Paul. But the guy who sticks out in my mind, I won't say it was the most impressive game. I think that Pat Bev and Paul Reed together, put whoever guy at 1 and 2 you want. I think they were both incredibly impressive. But one guy who impressed too was Kelly Oubre. And it was a very uneven game at times for Kelly Oubre. But when that fourth quarter came around, boy, was that guy locked in. I mean, when you look at some of these, he had a putback. It wasn't like a jam. It was more kind of like a Blake Griffin, back in the day poster where he doesn't even dunk it. He just throws it in over the back of Nikola Jokic. I mean, just incredible stuff. And as someone who's been able to see Jokic up close and personal, the way that mountain of a man can rebound the ball, for you to come up behind him and effectively get a putback over him is honestly it's incredible. So definitely a heck of a game out of Kelly Oubre. It was Oubre-ish at times, a bit uneven, a bit rushed, as is kind of just the nature of the Kelly Oubre experience. But some of those highlights were, man, they were real high. So hopefully he can fall back into that role we saw him in earlier in the season as the team gets more and more healthy, because I think the more he plays within that role, the better he plays. But he gave him everything that he had on Saturday night, and that was definitely a welcome sign.
Hey, I thought you were going to say Marcus Morris. I when you were building up, I'm like, he's going Marcus Morris, but Oubre, that's a good pick, man. It's a good pick.
There was stuff to like out of Morris. There was stuff not to like out of Morris. He seemed like he was automatic from 3 to start the game. Yeah. And that was obviously crucial to how they played. But it felt very clear, as was kind of the case with all the Sixers, considering you have all these guys who are playing all these minutes. They don't normally play that much. They don't normally play those roles. They don't play. Paul Reed, for crying out loud, played 42 minutes. Oubre played 40 minutes. You had Pat Bev 37. So these guys are tired at the end of the game. Like that is sensical. That is logical. But Morris in particular just really seemed kind of worn by the end of it. And one thing that I was a bit surprised about, Nick Batum only taking 1 shot. And I believe that shot was not until the fourth quarter, right. If not late in the third. It just seemed, I know he's not the most aggressive guy, and he usually works off of crisp kickouts from Tyrese or from Joel. So obviously he's not working that game that night, but still just 1 shot attempt from Nick Batum. I don't know if there was something going on that night or what, but it just seemed, I don't want to use the word uncharacteristic, but it did seem unfortunate, because I think the team could have used a little bit more out of him. But part of that also just works into scheming him open. So that kind of falls a little bit on everybody there. But all in all, it's about as good as you can ask for coming out of a loss given the situation. Unfortunately, that was all completely overshadowed by the storyline of the night, which was Joel Embiid being pulled from the game less than 20 minutes before tip-off. tried to warm up. Medical staff didn't like what they saw, pulled him from the game. So there's a lot that can be said about this. And Sam, I'm going to turn it over to you in just a second. The one thing I want to point out about it may have been Thursday, it may have been Friday. I can't remember when. The announcement came out from Ramona Shelburne that Joel Embiid was going to be playing against the Denver Nuggets. And before I delve even further into this is not a knock on Ramona. This is a knock on the Sixers medical staff. With how Joel's injury treatment has been handled over the past years, not even just this season, but years, when have they ever said multiple days ahead of a game or even just a single day before the game that he was good to go? This entire season, he's been questionable up until the last minute. He runs through his little own test, his little drills, in the pregame shoot around and his pregame warm up, and then they decide from there. That's how it's been treated this entire season. So the second that notification kind of came across, I'm not going to act like I knew something that everyone else didn't. I would just say I was very surprised when I saw that, as I think a lot of people were. So to then see him pulled, just before the tip, not the most surprising thing, far less surprising than that original notification that came out. But, Sam, what were your initial thoughts when you saw that? And what were your thoughts to the reaction from not only the Denver Nugget fans, but NBA fans across social media who immediately outpoured their opinions on the matter?
Before we dive into some of like the crazy nonsense that was like almost speculated and then spewed once, he was a late scratch, I will say that I do agree that this was handled poorly. To not even put him on the injury report and then for him to be out just made this whole thing way more complicated than it had to be. It was clear he tweaked his knee in the Thursday game against the Pacers. He played through it, didn't play the fourth because it was a blowout, not in Philly's favor. But to not even have him on the injury report, and then, as you said, Ramona tweeted it out, and then the day of, it was close to the tip-off, but Tim Bontemps, whether I don't know if he cited who he heard it from, whether it was from Embiid himself or from Nurse, but he did say, like, Embiid's going to play, but Maxey and Tobias aren't. And then for Woj's reporting to come out and how the team didn't like how he looked in the warm-ups, like, look, obviously the goal is for the Sixers to go for the championship. Keeping him out of this one game, not stressing something that's there, obviously is the right call, but it's just such a bad look for him to not be on, like, even just, I don't think this would have changed the narrative because there are some people who have decided they don't like the way Joel goes about what he does for some very stupid reasons. So it wasn't going to change in their minds, but at least it would have given the Sixers, like, Mike Malone speculated after the game the league is probably going to investigate them, and he's right. Like, teams have gotten dinged for different reasons with the rest, but holding guys out of games when they weren't on the injury report, that's exactly what the Sixers did. And regardless of the reason, to not even have him on the injury report is probable. Like, to not even note it down in the official injury report was such a bad look. And I do get, like, it's blown out of proportion a little bit, but I also do understand, like, between Embiid and Jokic, it's been said a bunch, make it clear here, they don't care about any of this. They have tons of respect for each other. They're not getting caught up in any of this. Like, they just appreciate each other, and that's that. And it's very refreshing to hear from them. But, like, I do kind of understand why there is a big, desire for Joel or for Jokic to have his chance to go against Embiid in Denver. Last 2 years, the first game was in Philly. Embiid played great, and then Jokic hasn't had a chance to kind of get back at him. So I do understand why there's so much buzz on top of just, two of the best players in the game, two of the best players who have been in the MVP race. But yeah, the way the Sixers handled this, like, there have been absences that Joel has had, not just in Denver, but over the course of his career, that's, like, no problem. But the way this was handled, I understand, like, wanting to get him ready for this game, but like I said, it was just not handled very well. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see, the NBA official Twitter account come out and say, the Sixers have been fined for whatever. I'm not sure what the specific wordage would be. I'm just guessing, but yeah, it was just not handled very poorly. And for the whole day leading into it, it's finally going to happen. Yeah. And then the last second, it's not. Like, that just stinks.
No, it does. Listen, there is a part you have to think about. Like, this is not good for for the fans and their experience. At the end of the day, the health of the player is far more important. But it's the issue isn't Embiid not playing; it's how the situation was handled. You're absolutely right. So again, keeping that in mind, Uriah, there's been a lot of narrative, and we'll talk about Embiid on the road in general in just a second. But there's been a lot of narrative about Embiid specifically ducking Denver for the past 5 years. He hasn't played since 2019 in Denver. Is there any? Let me put it to you this way: do you care that Joel Embiid has not played in Denver since 2019?
I don't care, but I'm sure there are season ticket holders in Denver that salivate at the idea of seeing their guy, as Sam was saying, get a chance to retort or to come back after Embiid pretty much embarrassed him last season on national TV. And then this season, the Sixers took one at home. So I don't see that as a bigger deal for me per se, but I do feel for Denver fans. Like I remember obviously I'm a Sixers fan, and when LeBron was with Cleveland, I think maybe his third or fourth year, I think I bought tickets to a Cleveland game and he didn't show up. I was bummed out because that was like my one opportunity to see greatness, Allen Iverson versus LeBron James. And I feel bad for the kids who have been hyped up over this game. It's NBA Rivals Week. The NBA has been pumping that for the past few weeks. So I feel for the fans. Mike Malone, he tried to put it on the fans and then he started lamenting about, oh, my game plan. Look, man, like you're a professional coach, professional players. You can game plan for Paul Reed if you need to, right? So yeah, I don't think it's a big deal. I don't think there's anything relevant to it. And it's just one of those things. It's very unfortunate and not ideal.
The
Yeah,
games
I mean, not a. Yeah, go on, Sam.
the games that Joel has missed. So first of all, this whole ducking narrative, like he has one chance a year to play this game. And I know some people look at it as, oh, this is the one game a year, the one road game you got to get to. But no, it's also like one chance a year. And by chance, if there's an injury that occurs beforehand, he doesn't have another chance to make that up. It's not like they're a team like the Celtics, who the Sixers will play at in the road twice, right? There's only one shot a year for Embiid to play in Denver. So obviously what happened this year. Last year, he was ruled out well ahead of the game after playing 2 nights of a back-to-back. And I forget what exactly he tweaked, but he tweaked something in the second game, and that led to the decision to not play him in Denver 2 nights later. Then the 2 seasons prior to that, he was in the middle of a streak where he was already out, and the Denver game happened to coincide in that streak. In 2021-22, the in Denver game was the 5th of 9 straight that Joel missed, and it was it was in smack dab in the middle of a 6-game road trip. The year before that, it was the second to last game he missed in a streak of 10 games, and that was the second to last game of that road trip there. So the chances are not like as much as people make it out to be. And again, like, yeah, it's the one road trip. Again, it's a rivalry for other people. It's not a rivalry. It's not like Joel, like, oh, I'm going to wake up and I'm going to, stick it to Jokic. Like, obviously he wants to play against the best, but it's just not this, game that people are making it out to be, where it's like, oh, you have to make sure you're healthy for this one game. And try as you may be, hi, Frankie. Try as he may be, sometimes it's luck of the draw, right? Like, I forget who mentioned this, but I saw someone on Twitter point out that Joel hasn't played in Sacramento in a few years. And obviously the Kings are not as much of a
the Sacramento Kings.
He is ducking that smoke from
ducking NBA royalty. Look at that.
Royalty. Yeah, he's afraid of the beam. No, but for real, like, obviously, again, the Kings are not as much of a, part of the narrative with Embiid as Jokic and the Nuggets are, but it is just way overblown. People, they don't want to look at the context. People who complain about Embiid missing these games, missing these certain specific road games where he's playing teams over 500, are the type of people who are like, oh, I'm just asking questions. They don't care about the context. They don't care about the nuance. They don't want to look any deeper than the surface level. It's just, I'm just pointing something out. I'm just asking a question, and I'm leaving it up for anyone to answer for whatever agenda they may have. And it's extremely annoying. And we can get into the second argument a little later, but it's just so ridiculous to see this. And obviously it's Twitter, where it's just, quick reactions and people want to say what they want to say. So all of it is just extremely annoying. No one really looks at, oh, he's missed these games in Denver. Well, why is that? That second question doesn't get asked. It's just, oh, he missed these games in Denver. He must be, as one Denver writer asked Nick Nurse, is it a character issue? It's that question in particular, if you guys want to sound off of that, was particularly egregious. But this whole thing is a bunch of nonsense.
Yeah, I mean, so the whole narrative of Embiid being a road ducker, or specifically ducking the over 500 teams on the road, uh, there has been a member of NBA media who has pushed that agenda more than a media member ever should push an attack agenda against a player. And yeah, NBA Twitter has followed, and Twitter is one of those places where the old adage definitely fits. You'll never find a more wretched hive of scum and villainy. That's as great as Twitter can be sometimes. That's also the other side of that same coin. So, just some really crazy stuff going on with that. But then you go and you look at this game in Denver post game, the specific question that you were talking about. So Nick Nurse is asked specifically about what went into that decision for Joel Embiid to sit, and then a different reporter, a Denver reporter, asks a very quick follow up about how this represents on Embiid's character. And I would like to show a bit of grace as best I can, because this reporter, the way that the question was asked, it made me feel as if they are on a similar experience level to myself and you, Sam. So someone who is maybe within their first few years covering the team on the beat, like not just covering the team, but covering in the building, right? It felt like a very inexperienced question. And so I'm going to speak just about myself and my specific process when I first started doing this last year, going to these games as a credentialed media reporter. And for me, my process was to kind of take a step back and analyze the room during these questions. As much as everyone is excited to ask questions and ask questions of the head coach and of the stars who are sometimes there post game, I chose to take a step back and kind of understand the cadence of the room a bit, and also process the certain questions that a lot of the other reporters in the room asked, and specifically those who I have a lot of respect for a lot of people in those rooms, but specifically those who I have a great deal of respect for, listening to the way that they phrased their questions, the types of questions that they asked, when they asked them, what they didn't ask, even though I knew they were thinking about it, and everything such as that. And all that just to say, it felt as if this particular reporter instead chose to get, I don't want to say like a clickbait question in there, but they kind of forsake all of those habits of wanting to ask the right question at the right time, and instead just ask whatever was coming across their mind. They didn't take that moment to think, and so they phrased the question very poorly. Because if you phrase this question in a way where you're asking more so about whether or not Nick Nurse thinks that there is anything to Embiid's habit of not playing, or why he seems to, the narrative is avoid Denver. I think that's one thing. I think that's a fair question to ask, why he hasn't played there since 2019. That's completely fair. But it's the use of the word character that I really have a problem with. First of all, this is a game of basketball. Let's take a step back, and let's not question the character of a human being because he did not play in your stadium. That is a very big accusation. It's a very inappropriate accusation considering the topic of what we're talking about. I mean, we're talking about a guy who has seen, and everybody has their own story. I'm not trying just to focus on Embiid. That's kind of the point I'm getting, is that all these players are people. It's what we forget about. Embiid has obviously gone through so much that's publicly documented in his life, and he is now an incredibly successful player in the NBA who has an incredibly loving family. Do I think that him missing a game in Denver is a reflection of his character? No, I think that how he's grown as a person since becoming a father is a reflection of his character. I think how he's grown as a leader on this team, taking these guys under his wing, which he's made immense steps. He's taken rather immense steps as a leader, specifically this season. I think that speaks to his character. I don't think missing a game in Denver, Colorado, speaks to his character. And I think that it was very poor word choice on that reporter's behalf. And I would like to think that I would hope that that is all that it was, and not sincerely implying anything negative about Joel Embiid's character simply based on him missing this game. But at the end of the day, what is forgotten all too often is that these players are people, and you are not a bad person because you miss a game due to injury or because you don't play in a specific stadium. We're just as people, we're way too quick to dehumanize athletes. And I think it's another case of that. And hopefully just a quick error in a moment where you're feeling a bit nervous, and hopefully it's not much more than that. But if it is anything more than that, then that's obviously a person who should be rethinking their current career. So it's something that really should never happen. And again, hopefully it just never does again, whether it's Embiid or whomever else it is. I mean, this goes both ways, talking about Jokic as well. And, we've seen the negative slander specifically online against a guy like Nikola Jokic. And like, there's just no room for personal attacks just because you don't like something about a specific player. Like there's plenty of people, and there's also people actively in the NBA who have actually like done bad shit. Like, let's focus on talking about that. We don't need to talk about Joel ducking Denver. Like there are people who are currently playing, who are in the midst of trade rumors at this very moment, who have done heinous things. Like, let's just get a little perspective and let's move on from this whole Embiid ducking conversation. But before we do, Uriah, Sam, any other thoughts on the idea of Embiid ducking or his character or anything such as that?
I just wanted to say about the reporter who asked Embiid or about Embiid's character, don't put him in front of Giannis, because Giannis will put
Giannis
him
will chew
in
him
his
up and
place.
spit him out.
Remember when Giannis was like, somebody asked him about, was this season a failure? And Giannis did a really good job coming back at that reporter, not belittling him, but just comparing Michael Jordan and his unsuccessful seasons where he didn't advance in the playoffs. Like, Giannis did a really good job kind of, handling that reporter. And let's say Embiid does play in Denver next season. I wonder how that reporter will approach Embiid, or if he's even in the same room next season. That would be interesting.
What also would have been interesting, it's particularly interesting just thinking about recent happenings in Philadelphia sports. Had John Tortorella, Flyers head coach, been the head coach of the Philadelphia 76ers, this entire interaction would have gone completely differently. And if you want to learn more about that, look up John Tortorella and Sam. But really, just that is kind of funny to think about how that would have been handled. The reporter in the end was honestly lucky that it was Nick Nurse, who I thought had a great amount of candor and really just kind of quickly wrote it off. And then Keith Pompey stepped in like a pro and asked the very next question to just move on from that topic. So I think as far as all those are concerned, that was some good teamwork right there to kind of move on from a question that should have never been asked. But we're talking a good bit about the Sixers, and we've mentioned, kind of danced around the idea of the trade conversation. Let's put Denver behind us. Let's put it in the past where it belongs. Take a look forward. Trade. One more thing, Sam. What do you got?
Not Denver specifically, but this conversation of, I agree. I would love to move past the conversation of Embiid ducking, but I wanted to read off this the list of games. So
perfect.
It's focused obviously with the game in Denver. Everyone's like, oh, Embiid hasn't played in Denver, but on top of that specific destination, Embiid has been getting a lot of flack for not playing teams over 500 on the road. And there is, again, like I mentioned, it's just asking questions and not trying to figure out the answer, just leaving it out there, which is a typical bad faith thing you see just everywhere online. But there's context behind Embiid not playing a whole lot of games against teams over 500 on the road. First of all, there's just not that many opportunities. Like half the teams are somewhere hovering around 500 or below 500. Some of these teams are in the West. You only play them once. Most teams in the East, like you don't play them twice. So unless they're all division rivals, you're not going to have that many chances to do that. I looked at the Sixers schedule. We are recording this Sunday night. So as of right now, the Sixers have played 21 road games. 10 of them have been against teams currently with a record over 500. The Bucks, Timberwolves, Thunder, Pelicans. Wait, I'm reading the wrong list. Sorry, scratch that. Okay, so 21 road games total. These are the teams with records over 500. The Bucks, Timberwolves, Thunder, Pelicans, Celtics, Heat, Magic twice, Pacers, and Nuggets. Embiid has played in 4 of those games. So obviously that's just 40%, but there were reasons for each one. The Timberwolves game was scheduled horrifically. It was on the second night of a back-to-back where the first game was in Philly. And I think back-to-backs are stupid. And I think they're made all the more stupid by having them be in 2 different locations, especially locations that are as far away as Minnesota and Philadelphia. There's just no reason to do that. If you need to have back-to-backs, NBA, have them be at the very least a bus ride away, or have them be in the same city. Have back-to-backs against the New York teams or the LA teams, or something like that, or like just the Florida teams. It's so ridiculous that the NBA has not figured that out. Wrapped in this conversation of frustrations about Embiid not playing certain games, and a lot of other players too, is the fact that the NBA still shoots itself in the foot with its scheduling way more often than it should. It's just ridiculous. Like keeping this, the 82 games and improvising a bunch of different stuff with the in-season tournament. Like there's just so many easy decisions that they continue to fail to make. And it results in games like that Sixers game against Minnesota. They're one game in Minnesota, one of the best teams, where it's a very tough decision for guys to play. It's the second night of a back-to-back after a long flight that night. So Embiid missed that game. He contracted an illness for the games against the Pelicans and the Celtics. He was not the only one dealing with that illness. I think Jaden Springer had the illness and was ruled out for both of those games. Tyrese Maxey and Nico Batum contracted the illness and missed the Celtics game after playing in New Orleans. Then before facing the Heat and the Magic in a 4-game road trip, Embiid twisted his ankle in the last game. Like we saw early in the game, he was going up for a rebound and he turned his ankle. He missed that entire road trip. He didn't come back and play the so-so Rockets and the crappy Bulls at the end of the road trip. He sat out that entire thing because he twisted his ankle. And then obviously this Nuggets thing, which talk about how poorly it was handled, he was dealing with something. So again, this is something that's just thrown out there with no context. In the context, either if you choose to believe that Embiid is ducking, you choose to believe that he is making up all these injuries, all these types of things, that he's just blatantly lying, which is a ridiculous assertion, completely baseless. And I understand you want to look at certain patterns of things, the way players play, where they play, whatnot, but to just assume, Embiid is, Pistons Wizards man, it's ridiculous because again, he also, last thing I'll say, he doesn't make the schedule. The Sixers have had a bunch of games on the road against crappy teams. He didn't choose that. It's not his fault that, again, these opportunities only come around ever so often, and it's just I'm ready to move on. I don't even want to.
Yeah, I mean, this whole argument was designed in a lab in an effort to discredit one of the greatest NBA seasons in history, and it's honestly it's kind of pathetic. So it's not something that I think really. I'm glad that we took the time to acknowledge the falsity of it, but it's not really something that I want to focus on having for the rest of the season, which. It's going to be. I mean, obviously, we had the negative conversations around Joel's MVP case last season that lingered on even through the playoffs, and now this year we have Embiid sitting in general, but specifically this narrative that he is ducking teams on the road. It's laughable. It's just have fun. Watch the NBA for fun. Like, what are you watching basketball for? If not for fun, if you do not enjoy this game. So if you want to just bitch and cry about it and not enjoy the game of basketball, then do it and then just shut up. Honestly, like that's all I'm asking. So
There's
it's
a
stupid,
tweet
but
out there. Sorry, Zach. There's a tweet out there that
no, you good.
says it was a joking tweet, but it was something along the lines of going to skim the box scores and argue with people who actually watch the game. And there's far too many people who not only take that seriously and like just adopt that,
Yeah.
but have a big platform on Twitter. This is very frustrating.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Well, you look at the amount of people who didn't even realize that Embiid had injured his knee in the game against Indiana. I mean, like that's one huge example of people who are willing to have these baseless arguments defended as if it's gospel and not even have a lick of context to the situation. So it's ridiculous. But now let's put it in the past. Let's talk about some fun stuff. Let's talk about some acquisition rumors, and I say that because they're not just trade rumors. But the first one definitely is Chris Haynes of Bleacher Report and TNT reporting that the Phoenix Suns have had interest in KJ Martin, the Sixers' KJ Martin. There's been a little bit of smoke throughout the season that the Sixers they're open to the idea of moving Martin, who's in the final year of his deal, and they're looking for a quality second round pick in return. So, Uriah, I guess I want to start with you. What are your thoughts about the idea of the Sixers shopping KJ? Is that something that you'd be willing to take a second round pick? Do you find the value in just keeping him throughout the year's end? And do you have any reason to want to keep him on the roster next year?
No, I think I wouldn't mind parting ways with him and getting that second round pick. I mean, that's just more assets for the Sixers in the future. And he's still, I don't know, like he was in the game against Denver, and I think I don't know how many points did he score, like 5 or 6 points. I can't remember, but I just think that he's not really helping the team. He's not going. I can't see him getting any true minutes, whether it's regular season or postseason. So, final year of his contract, make the deal. If they decide to keep him, I can't imagine them paying him what he probably feels that he deserves. So I feel cutting ties now and getting something in return that could possibly help move the needle in terms of getting either something in the future or the off season or even before the deadline. So I would not mind parting ways. He doesn't move the needle for me, and he hasn't since he's been here.
And Sam, how about you? Do you think that there's any value in whether it's retaining him or even using him as a young player in a deal? Or do you think that the idea of just gaining that second round pick to possibly flip in a deal has either more or equal value?
I would say I imagine that most teams out there, if the Sixers need to include a sweetener in a trade, would be more interested in that second round pick than KJ Martin, who I think is a solid player. I can definitely see a way where he contributes on both sides of the ball. He obviously has phenomenal athleticism. He's got, just great physicality and can use that against a wide range of players on the defensive end. Offensively, obviously, he's a fantastic lob threat. Has shown in his past to be a little bit of a three-point shooter, not like a genuine chucker, but someone who can, make the open shot when it comes his way. But I also agree that it is kind of tough. It feels like he's obviously in the back of the rotation for Nurse. So if he isn't going to play that much, include him in a trade if another team wants him, or you might as well just go and get that pick. Obviously for the Suns, they've made so many trades where it's hard to imagine them coming up with a quality second round pick. I have their picks for the future pulled up right now, but there's so many protections that it's kind of tough to read on the fly. But regardless, I mean, KJ's a solid player. I can see him panning out somewhere. When Mark Stein actually reported that he was available, I was thinking of fits for him. And one fit I kind of like, kind of funnily, is Denver. I think that he could be sort of a diet Aaron Gordon for them off the bench if they wanted to go that route. They obviously have a young guy who's super athletic. Two guys come off the bench who are super athletic, Christian Brown and Peyton Watson, who have been pretty solid for them. So for Phoenix, I get it. They need some depth. They want an athletic guy like Martin who can help create some vertical spacing with the trio of scorers they have. For Sixers purposes, I mean, I don't think he's a guy that they need to trade, but he's a guy that if they end up moving for a second-round pick that makes it easier to make a trade elsewhere, I think that's perfectly fine too.
Yeah, so you mentioned Phoenix's draft picks and the protections around them. So to put them into perspective, they have a 2024 from San Antonio, which is basically a fake second round pick. It's protected 31-54. San Antonio is not finishing outside of that this season. That's plain and simple. They have a 2026 Detroit, Milwaukee, Orlando, the worst of those picks. They have a 2028 from Boston, 2028 from Memphis, 2029 from Memphis as well. There's just no real value in those picks. So, I understand the interest on Phoenix side, but I'm not quite sure where Philadelphia finds that that's the fit. I definitely buy the idea of them looking to trade KJ, but for that kind of return, I mean, you're gonna have to talk about, I think, multiple second round picks. And even then, I'm just not sure that Phoenix has the ammunition. I do like the idea of Denver. And one thing that we've been able to see from KJ, just with the Sixers being so shorthanded, he's gotten time for more and more minutes. And unfortunately, the jump shot is not really coming along as many people would like to see from him. He's kind of had an abysmal year from three. But what has been interesting is him as kind of a rim running partner for Tyrese Maxey. And he's a surprisingly good lob threat. And it's not surprising on the one hand because we know how athletic he is, but we've just never seen him run that kind of action before. So to see him now working in that kind of capacity, do I think the Sixers should keep him just because he's basically their lone lob threat? No, I don't think that they should keep him just for that reason. But I think there are teams that definitely could have some interest in him because he's a high energy level defender. He is a helpful player on the fast break. You can put him in the dunker spot, and you can, even run those types of pick and roll actions with him if you have that type of lead guard at your disposal. So if you're a team, even like a Charlotte, that is just kind of looking for young talent, has a chance to re-sign him, in the offseason, pair him possibly with LaMelo Ball for now. They're moving on from a player who was mentioned previously on the podcast, Miles Bridges, also another possible candidate to Phoenix. You're moving on from him, so you replace him with another athletic forward in KJ Martin. You're able to still kind of run some of those similar concepts. Maybe you bring him back on a good deal. But those are the kind of teams that I would be looking for KJ Martin, those who could kind of maximize his skill set. I obviously think they're going to want any team that has Martin. It's going to want to see him kind of grow a bit, but what you're looking to get at him is what he already provides, and that's energetic, tough defense, and that's athleticism on both ends. So I think that there is a ceiling, and I think that there is definitely a rationale for Philadelphia to move on from him, but I wouldn't necessarily say that Phoenix is the most logical landing spot. Even a team like Sacramento, I think, makes more sense. Dallas makes a lot of sense. Like, there's these teams that they are in a position in the playoffs, but they just have more to offer than Phoenix. And that's kind of the situation that the Suns have put themselves in and kind of shot themselves in the foot, where they've put all this leftover capital into players like Bradley Beal and Yusuf Nurkic, who's been fine for them, but he hasn't elevated them to the level that they're looking for. There's just repercussions for that, especially under this new CBA. So that's the situation they find themselves in, and they're going to have a hard time finding a way out of it. But while KJ is on the block, I just don't see Phoenix as a marketable landing spot. But one more reason to possibly move on from a guy like KJ Martin is that you'd be able to create a roster spot, which I think is going to be really crucial for Philadelphia. And I've seen a couple people talk about this. The first person I saw was Derek Bodner, and then Jake Fisher also mentioned this concept as well. That's the concept of Philadelphia possibly being one of the most aggressive teams on the buyout market. So based on the new CBA, and this is subject to change because the trade deadline could affect where salary cap numbers fall by the end of it here. But based on the current CBA, there are only so many teams who can participate effectively in the buyout market for players who made more than the mid-level exception at the beginning of this year. So for players like Kyle Lowry, players like Gordon Hayward. These are guys who are making more than that mid-level on their current contracts. So if they're bought out, a lot of these teams that are past that apron in the CBA, they're not going to be able to bring these guys aboard. Philadelphia not being over that apron at this point in time are a major contender to sign some of these guys with little competition. Few people can offer not only the opportunity, they can offer the contender status, and then they can obviously offer the contract at all. That makes them a major player. And one guy who's been specifically linked to Philadelphia is the aforementioned Kyle Lowry, Villanova's own, Philadelphia area native. What would it mean to you, Uriah, or what level of interest do you have in bringing a guy like Kyle Lowry into Philly?
First off, I have to say, did you guys know that Kyle Lowry over his career has made almost $250 million? I just looked at
It doesn't feel like it. That's crazy.
247 million in salary money he's made. So good for him. I think the idea of having a player like Lowry on this team, which we do not have a real true backup point guard. So he comes here in the buyout. He gives you stability. He gives you experience. He gives you veteran leadership, and for probably a decent price, right? So I just checked all time. Actually, no, of current players leading with assists total, he's fifth right now, almost 7,000 assists. So he brings this energy. He may not be as athletic as he used to be. Obviously, he's 37 years old, but I would not mind that. Originally, at first, when I heard him, like, I kind of want to steer clear of that. But if we can't pick up somebody else to back up Maxey, DeAnthony Melton's been banged up for a while. We don't know what's going on with his injury, at least right now. I wouldn't mind that. And to have him playing alongside another Philly native, Marcus Morris, I think that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, no, I think the narrative itself is pretty cool. I think Lowry still has something left in the tank. Obviously, he's not a starting level player in the league anymore. He's kind of shown that with the Miami Heat. I do think that alongside Morris, the vibes are certainly interesting, and we've seen the impact of Marcus Morris coming home, and it's honestly it is like, say what you will, like there is a positive impact from that to these vibes in these locker room. Marcus Morris is present, and a lot of that's him as a person, but then a factor of it also is him being home in Philadelphia and him getting the key to the city. I know some people kind of laughed a little bit at that idea, but like good for him, man. Like to see him like come home and just be so clearly happy in Philadelphia. For a guy like Kyle Lowry, it'd be great to see that for him too, just from a narrative perspective. And coming back playing under Coach Nick Nurse again, that's something that you would think that he would welcome that. And of course, just playing for a team that is among the contenders like the Sixers are, there's a lot to like for Lowry. The one concern is, where does he exactly fit in the rotation? You mentioned the Sixers don't exactly have a true point guard, and that's true, but there is this current spot being taken up by Pat Bev,
Right.
where
Right.
he's playing the one, he's playing the two. He's been so valuable for the Sixers this year, and so many minutes are already going to Tyrese Maxey, and Kelly Oubre is playing a lot of the two, not just the three. So where exactly does Lowry fit in that? Sam, do you have any concerns about Lowry from like a minutes and a role fit perspective if you were to join Philadelphia?
That role / fit is kind of the reason why it's tough for me to envision like a scenario where like Lowry plays big minutes on the Sixers, barring a roster shakeup. But real quick, these are the 7 according to Bobby Marks, one of the best cap CBA gurus out there. These 7 teams cannot sign a player whose salary this season is more than 12.4 million, which is the MLE. So the Warriors, Clippers, Celtics, Suns, Bucks, Heat, and Nuggets cannot. So that's a lot of teams, particularly in the East, that have exceeded the threshold and thus won't be eligible to sign a guy like Lowry. And that certainly helps the Sixers' chances. And you guys obviously mentioned Pat Bev, and to me, that's kind of where I don't really see Lowry's fit all that much. So Pat Bev has been really solid for the Sixers on top of being just the quintessential like gritty Philly guy. He legitimately has been productive. He's stepped up in big games when he needs to, and He'll have some games where he's, a bit, inconsistent or whatnot, but he always plays super hard. He can run the offense, which is super valuable, especially given the fact that this team is devoid of guards who can reliably handle the ball and create, here and there. And I do think there's a vision where Lowry is more productive or helpful in a playoff series than Pat Bev, but I think it would just be, replacing one with the other seems to be a move that I don't know if Daryl Morey would make. Daryl Morey also has a relationship with Lowry because he traded for him in Houston, then traded him to Toronto way back in the day. So I think Lowry, the numbers with Lowry and Pat Bev this season are staggeringly similar, but two things stick out to me, and this is not just per minutes, it's per possessions and whatnot. First, Lowry, his production came as a starter, whereas Pat Bev has come mostly off the bench. And obviously there's a lot of mix between playing starters and bench players. That's just how rotations work. It's not, 5-guy platoons coming in and out and whatnot. But, ostensibly you would imagine.
Unless you're Doc Rivers. But I'm sorry, go on.
But yeah, unless you are playing for the new coach of the Milwaukee Bucks, you can expect to play a mix, but generally you can imagine Lowry's playing against tougher competition and starters than Pat Bev is playing a lot of minutes against backups. And then the second is, both of these guys, Lowry and Beverly, they can handle the ball, they can pass, they can create here and there, but they're also limited as they're starting to get, older in age, in their mid-30s. It's great that they're still even here, but especially near the end of the season and in high leverage, competition in the playoffs, might be tougher to get real value out of them. And the one thing that sticks out to me with Lowry is his shooting. Not only is he way more efficient than Pat Bev, he shoots at a much higher volume. So I would imagine that makes him an easier guy to play around Embiid and Maxey, where you can rely on him to just let it fly. And you want his ball handling here and there. And again, Beverly's been solid in that area, but you can imagine having a guy who is more reliable and spacing the floor as a role player you'd want to play around the two stars. But at the end of the day, I don't think Lowry and Beverly fit together on the court. They're both, smaller point guards, obviously. Pat Bev plays well above his size. Lowry is really strong. But it's just tough to imagine such a small backcourt coming off the bench and relieving the starters that you kind of would have to choose one. And I think choosing Lowry over Beverly, while there's the chance that he's an upgrade, I think would be kind of risky. And I understand that the Sixers, the vibes are cool and all, but it's also most about what's best for the team and will help them win. But that also is a move where the level of upgrade you're going to get isn't totally certain. Beverly is going to do fine, and he'll probably see maybe a little less minutes in the playoffs, whatever the case may be. But I think that although there are a lot of indicators on top of being a Philly and Villanova guy, that why Lowry might look for the Sixers, why there's going to be a bunch of links to them, there already was one. I don't think the fit is there unless Pat Bev is involved in a trade. And again, in that case, I don't see that being super realistic. So, the fact that Lowry can't go to many other contenders helps Philly, but I think making him fit would be too clunky to the point where I think they're just better off saying no thanks.
Can I just jump in and say, I understand the fit. I understand the fit. I agree wholeheartedly. And I started this podcast episode praising the job that Pat Bev did, but I just really see having a point guard with the experience that he has for the money, for the bargain that we get. I think having him as insurance, because if anything ever happened to Melton or Maxey or even Pat Bev, I don't trust, his name is escaped me right now. Springer.
Jaden Springer.
Yeah. His athleticism is off the charts. I've never seen a guard do a chase down, two-handed block the way he's done. I'm rooting for the kid, but he's just so raw. And if Embiid is going to truly end the season in the way that we all hope he does, with raising a championship trophy at the Wells Fargo Center, we need an insurance guard. And that's why I think, why not? Why not make space for KJ Martin? Have fun in Phoenix. Good luck to you. Bring home Kyle. Put him on the team.
I do get that, but do you, what we will say, let's say either Springer's involved in a trade or Martin. Do you think Lowry would accept being, or Pat Bev accept being, the third stringer? Do you think they can play together more? Do you have more faith in them playing together, or do you think that one of those guys would be willing to take a backseat to a backseat?
I think you guys mentioned vibe earlier. It's all about winning, right? And you got a hometown guy, Kyle Lowry, not just grew up in Philly, North Philly. I grew up in North Philly, but also Villanova, right? To know that he'd be on that team, like in the city where he grew up, like me, just like Marcus Morris said, it means everything to him to be on the Sixers. I hope he stays. You know, he might be on the trade block, but back to Lowry. I think the fit, like you said, Sam, it's hard to imagine them playing together. But again, we need insurance. You cannot trust a second year guard who is crazy athletic, but just lacks that offensive awareness to make the right pass in crucial situations in a 7-game series, whether it's semifinals, conference finals, or finals. You just can't. You can trust a Kyle Lowry if someone gets banged up in the playoffs.
Yeah, so I think that there's a couple different ways to think about it. First of all, from Lowry's perspective, coming home is great, but if he does want to go to another potential contender where there's a little bit more opportunity, there still are some teams to choose from. Now we can debate how close they are to actual contender status, but teams like Cleveland, teams like New York's always going to be an option. I think that they are going to ride out this Miles McBride, Malachi Flynn thing and see how that works out. But the Knicks are always a threat in that regard. Again, the Mavericks, the Cleveland Cavaliers, the Sacramento Kings, the Minnesota Timberwolves, and a lot of those are outside of the Dallas Mavericks. Typically oddball landing spots for some of these guys, but they are upper end playoff teams that have real opportunity for minutes for a guy like Lowry, where he can kind of show out a little bit. And Dallas, in particular, is I think a more welcome fit just with his experience with Texas. Now, Dallas and Houston are completely different animals, but listen, a no state income tax state is a no state income tax state. So that also is another opportunity there, and to play with Luka, to play with Kyrie, like that. I think that in particular, I would say Dallas would probably be if I were Lowry, where I would want to go. But as far as him playing in Philadelphia, the fact of the matter is you're not looking at replacing Pat Bev's roster spot, right? You're looking at either KJ Martin, Furkan Korkmaz, possibly even Jaden Springer. We don't know how the trade deadline is gonna work out quite yet. Or even if you're doing some type of consolidation trade, who's to say that Robert Covington's still here past the trade deadline? Who's to say Marcus Morris? There's a litany of different guys who there's just not that certainty about. So you're not replacing one-to-one one of these actual rotation players with Lowry. So you're kind of getting that opportunity to hopefully have that embarrassment of riches, and your playoff rotation is going to be roughly 8 deep, obviously. So that opportunity is not going to be there. But one thing that you kind of pointed out earlier, Raya, that kind of sticks out to me is you have that strategic opportunity situation, excuse me, based on matchup. And I think that's one thing that could potentially come into play, where if we're looking at a series or a situation in a game where it stands out that either Kyle Lowry's the right option here or Pat Bev's the right option here, I think it's almost kind of a defer by night or defer by round at the very least kind of situation where, you go to one guy one night or one round, you go to another guy another night, another round. And I don't think you have to worry too much about Lowry and Pat Bev playing together, unless you're talking about regular season games, which I'm not as concerned about. But Sam, you're absolutely right. And I think the more important question is Kyle Lowry going to be okay with that? Because whether or not Pat Bev's okay with that, at the end of the day, he's still on the team. Hopefully, and based on his character from what I've seen this year, he's a guy who's really ready just to kind of roll with everything in the sake of whatever the team needs and the sake of winning. But is Kyle Lowry willing to do that, to go from where he was starting with Miami to now this off and on reserve role in Philadelphia? Is that something that he wants? That's at the end of the day, that's obviously the massive question. While I think it could benefit Philadelphia in some areas, you have to consider who the other buyout candidates are if they're a greater fit. You have to take a look at what the Sixers actually do at the trade deadline. And more important than anything, does Kyle Lowry actually want this? Because if he doesn't, well, your answer's already been, made for you. So that's really just the decision there. But There are some other potentially interesting names on the trade, or rather on the buyout market watch. Guys like Lowry's current teammate, Gordon Hayward, who could provide a little bit of shooting, a little bit of handling from the wing, not so much on the defensive end. Guys like Alec Burks in Detroit, if they're looking to move on from him. Another guy who can kind of facilitate that point guard role, who I even liked at a lot of these points during the season as a trade candidate. But DeLon Wright, if the Wizards don't move him at the trade deadline, is he staying with the team, or are they going to be moving on from him? And if that's the case, and you're looking at Kyle Lowry versus DeLon Wright on the buyout market, well, I think if you're Philadelphia, your choice is easy as anything to go with a guy like DeLon Wright, where you don't have those size concerns. The defense is even stronger than it is in the case of Lowry. And you have a guy who you actually can play alongside guys like Pat Bev, Tyrese Maxey, DeAnthony Melton, whomever. But whether it's buy trade or buyout market, I do think they need to add a guard before the playoffs, just because, you mentioned the concerns about certain guys staying healthy. I have major concerns about DeAnthony Melton staying healthy right now. And hopefully all this time off has really done him some good, and we don't have to, worry about and marinate on this injury any longer for him. But this is effectively 2 years with back injuries that have hampered at least his play, if not his availability. So, I do have concerns about DeAnthony Melton. So they definitely need to add a guard to help quiet those concerns, or really just not even a backup per se, but maybe even a better option A that even alleviates some pressure off of Melton. I mean, Sam, am I off base in that at all?
No, I'm with you, and I would like to endorse DeLon Wright as a possibility, but also one quick Lowry destination that I think is a possibility: Minnesota, where former Sixer Shake Milton seems to be losing his grip on the backup point guard spot. And Lowry and Chris Finch actually have spent 2 years together, albeit on two different teams and very far apart. Finch was an assistant in Houston and for Lowry's last season in Toronto. So there's at least some familiarity there. And they're one of, again, the better teams that are eligible to sign him in the first place. But to the point with Melton, I do agree that I think, he's a player that the Sixers are probably going to need a very good insurance policy for. I mean, he's a solid player, but on top of, I think, working better off the bench anyway than as a starter, these back issues are really risky. They're not anything to play with, regardless of what they are. And he tried to come back for a game and then was, put back, on the bench as he tries to come back. And he's ramping up again. But, you just never know with those things. So, I think DeLon Wright would fit super, super well. He is, I think if you're looking for a guard / wing who can provide on both ends, be an upgrade, bring some size, bring some, shooting, some perimeter defense. I think the gold standard out there is Caruso, but Chicago is so unpredictable. No one knows what's going to happen there. I do think DeLon Wright makes a lot of sense. And I also agree with you, Zach, that someone who can handle and create is going to be super important, because the problem with the Sixers more often than not in the playoffs has been offense. Defensively, they're generally fine. And that's because Joel, when he's really, really locked in, is one of the very best rim protectors out there. I mean, guys just don't want to go in the paint when he's there. So because he's there and they have enough good defense personnel, they've got Nick Nurse, who has never been afraid to experiment. I think they'll be fine on that end, but they really need guys with more juice as creators, whether it's a guard, whether that's a forward like Hayward, who is good, but also, again, comes with injury concerns. Like he's pretty shaky considering all the stuff he's dealt with over the years. As solid as he is, even at his age, there's a lot of risk there. But I do agree that shot creation from whatever perimeter position is something the Sixers should really try to address at this deadline.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple needs. We've heard rumors of them being interested in potentially making an addition, in the big man department. Obviously, Paul Reed has begun to kick it up a little bit as of late, particularly since those rumors started leaking out a little bit. But at the end of the day, it's and wing defense, I think, is something that NBA teams are always looking for. But I think shot creation, exactly like you said, Sam, I think that's the one thing that the team's been looking for. And people like to kind of overly simplicate that sometimes as a backup point guard. Sometimes it's that, sometimes it's not. I mean, there's all different types of shot creators at even various different positions. So, I think more than likely you are looking at a guard, but whether that's a Tyus Jones type, or whether you're even looking at, and this isn't a name that I like for Philadelphia, but it's one that I've heard just by fans often mentioned, a Jordan Clarkson. Like, there's different guys who can create different shots different ways. So we'll see what happens come the trade deadline. We are a little bit less than 2 weeks away now, week and a half away from the trade deadline. There's going to be a lot coming forward about it. And we definitely will have kind of a trade deadline primer of sorts of a podcast before we have our reaction pod, of course, going over some things. But we're going to save those names, those ideal names that we'd like to see Philadelphia target, have a little bit more in-depth conversation about who they are reportedly going after. I'm sure we'll talk about the back and forth DeJounte Murray stuff and all that other good information. But for now, thank you so much for listening. I've been Zach Ciavolella here, of course, with Sam DiGiovanni, Uriah Young. And listen, we are get ready for this fun stretch. This is a Sixers beat reporter's dream every year, is this stretch of Western Conference road games starting at 10 o'clock.
3 and 4 nights. Oh, yes.
3 and 4 nights. So
Woo!
if you
and one of them was bumped up from 9 to 10 because it's on national TV. You love
Get your Red Bull ready. Get your Red Bull ready, Sam.
I'm a
Exactly.
guy. I like drinking Celsius energy drinks, so I'll be having those on the ready.
There you go.
Boom. There you go. So if you know a Sixers beat reporter, just give them a hug because they need it. I'll tell you that right much. So thank you again so much for listening again for another episode of Still Processing. And listen, let's go into this trade deadline. Let's keep this excitement up, and let's try not to duck on this team like Embiid has on Denver. But that's it. Have a great night.